Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to another video. Today, all I am doing is making a fun Halloween card with Crackerbox and Suzy stamps. Here's a look at the stamps I'll be using today. I also added in a little spider. You don't see him here, but I'll stamp him out in just a little bit. So Crackerbox and Suzy stamps, if you don't know, are a rubber stamp company. They are not wood-mounted rubber stamps. They are cling stamps, and they're super easy to use. But first, I need to go ahead and start creating my background. I'm starting off with an A2 size piece of plain white cardstock, and I'm going to mask off the bottom of this. To do that, I'm using painter's tape. I use blue painter's tape that you can buy online at Amazon, or you can buy it at your local hardware store. I just ripped one side of that. That's going to create a nice jagged edge for me. And now I'm going to do some ink blending. You can use whatever inks you like to use. I'm using Catherine Pooler inks because it had the color I wanted, and I'm using the Lime Ricky ink. Now, the blending brushes I'm using are from Amazon. They are makeup brushes, but these are my favorite thing to ink blend with besides like my ink daubers. I use my ink daubers when I want a lot of solid color, but when I want blending, I normally reach for these brushes. Now, once I had the top ink blended with the Lime Ricky ink, I'm going to go ahead and put the top part that I ripped off of that painter's tape, line it up as best I can with my mark. It's not going to fit perfectly, that's fine. There's going to be a little bit of white space. This is mostly going to be covered, so it doesn't need to be perfect. Then I gave myself a little extra space with another piece of painter's tape, and I'll do some more ink blending. I'm using Over Coffee and Icing on the Cake inks from Catherine Pooler, starting off darker towards the top, going lighter as I go down. On the top, I went darker towards the bottom, went lighter as I went up. This is just going to create a nice grounding effect for my little pieces that are going to go on in just a moment. So once I had that blended, I'm going to go ahead and do the reveal. This is my favorite part, pulling off the tape. I'll pull that back, and I've got this great jagged floor, and then I've got my lime green background up there at the top. Now in the top left-hand corner, I'm going to give my spider something to hold on to, so I'm going to stamp this web. Now I didn't line it up properly, so I have a little bit of a gap up there at the top. I just used like a micron fine line black pen to color that in, fill those little lines in that didn't reach towards the top. It's not that big of a deal. And for my stamping ink, I'm using Midnight ink from Catherine Pooler. Before I start dealing with my stamped images, I am going to add some splatter to this background. I like to do my splatter with acrylic paint. This is Craft Smart paint, really cheap paint from Michaels. I put a little drop on a clear acrylic block, and I add a little bit of water to it to thin it down. I'm just using a piece of paper to cover up that brown part of my ink blending. I just want the splatters on the green ink blending. Then I'm dipping in a paintbrush into that paint, and I'll just tap it against my finger to give some nice splatter effect. You can do as little or as much as you want. I went pretty heavy-handed, as you can see, with my finished background. If you don't have black acrylic paint, you can also do this with a black dye ink. It's just not going to be as dark and opaque as what I'm doing here. Also, the acrylic paint gives you a little bit of texture that you can actually feel and see on your card. Now I'm going to set that aside to dry. Then it's time to stamp my images. My images, I'm using that little spider, the cat, and also this great broom. I'm inking them up with the Midnight ink from Catherine Pooler, and I'm using my Mini Misty to do my stamping. That really helps me out, especially when I'm stamping solid images like that cat and the spider, so I can do a double stamping just to make sure I get really nice solid color. So I just open my lid, ink it back up, place the lid back down and stamp it, and my stamps are perfectly aligned. Now they're nice and solid and black, and I can go ahead and start coloring these in. Now I also wanted to add a few of these little potion bottles, I guess you could call them. So I'm going to stamp a couple of those again with the Midnight ink. This was a little bit of an afterthought. You could definitely stamp these with your Misty. Again, afterthought, so I just used a quick acrylic block to stamp them out. Now for coloring, I am using some alcohol markers. These are Dick Blick Studio Brush markers. I'm using a tip-to-tip technique here to color in this first little bottle. I'm using some purple colors to do that. I'm using very Halloweenish colors, if you can tell. And on that cork, I'm going to go ahead and do a light coat of a lighter brown ink, and then to fill in those little dots, I used a darker brown. On the tag, I'm just coming in from both sides and doing a very light cream color, no blending on that. Now on this second bottle, I'm using a couple of greenish dark turquoisey colors, and then the cork I'll color in the exact same way, and the tag as well. Super small images, so they don't take long at all to color. But I wanted to add a little something extra, so I grabbed my white gel pen, and I'm just going to add these little bitty lines to make these look like rounded glass bottles. Just gives them a little bit more of a realistic look. There's a closer look at my little turquoise one all colored up and on the card. So adorable. Now for the little broom, I'm going to use some browns. I'm using that same color I used on the cork. I like to go ahead and pull different colors from what I've already used so everything kind of goes together. I'm using a darker brown to do some shading, lighter brown to blend it out, nothing fancy. I also grabbed a very, very light brown, almost tan color to color in those little things that are holding the broom together, and a darker brown on the stick of the broom. There's a closer look at those all colored and fussy cut, and of course once those were colored I did fussy cut all the images, including the cat and the spider as well. I just used scissors. Remember to turn your paper, not your scissors. That's going to help you so much when you do fussy cutting. There was one final piece to finish up before I started putting this card together, and that is the sentiment. This is an adorable sentiment. Crackerbox and Suzy Stamps has some great sentiments. Not only traditional thinking of you, those kind of things, but very snarky sentiments. Some of them are even a little rude if you're into that kind of thing. They're really a lot of fun, so I highly suggest going and checking those out. Now for this sentiment, I am stamping it on a zigzag rectangle die from Cat Scrappiness. I die cut that from white cardstock. Use my Misty, use the Catherine Pooler Midnight ink I've been using on this entire card. Did a couple stamps, and there it is. I absolutely love this large sentiment. Now on the back of that, I added a little bit of foam tape, and I'll pop that up right in the center of my card panel. Make sure your paint is dry if you've used it. It takes a little bit of time to dry because there are larger splatters. If you do a finer splatter with a dye ink, it's going to dry almost immediately, so you won't have that wait time. With the paint, you do have to wait a few minutes. That's why I did it first, and then I just go ahead and finish off the rest of my components while that's off to the side drying. Now next to that little rectangle with my sentiment, I'm going to go ahead and start popping in some of my other elements that I've colored and fussy cut. The first is the broom. I again used foam tape on the back of this. Then over on the left hand side, I'm going to add that little hunched over cat. He is such a little fun addition to this card. He was just released this past month with Crackerbox and Suzy Stamps. I also want to mention that if you are still watching this in the month of September, there's only a few days left, but all the stamps I'm using today are on sale for 20% off in the Crackerbox and Suzy Stamps store. So while you still have the opportunity, head on over there and take advantage of that sale. Now I'm adding in those little potion bottles that I've colored up. I'm just tucking them here and there, next to the broom, one next to the cat. And finally, I'm going to add that little bitty spider up there in his spider web. Absolutely adorable. I did attach that whole panel to an A2 side folding card base that I'm using horizontally. And there's the finished card. Super simple. I love the dimension all those little pieces give. It's such a fun Halloween card. And the sentiment is just perfect for the scene that I created. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching.